Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Darrin 1831 Collins. I'm super excited to come to you today as a partnership between myself and Burst Into Books. Uh, really looking forward to any work that I can do with Jarima in promoting a healthy Black esteem. Anything that I do as an author, I want to promote just and support a healthy Black self-esteem and the way that foundational Black Americans view ourselves as an outward identity towards the world. One thing that I want to talk about today, so I published my debut novel, Native Invisibility, a year ago, and I'm going to discuss some of the scenes, or one of the scenes that is really poignant and is kind of like the turning point of the book for the main character Jamal. Before I get before I get into that, though, I do want to discuss a personal experience that I've had with the police, and I want to encourage anybody who is listening today to explore your experiences with the police and also identify whether those police are doing their jobs in their interactions with you as a person. And you, as a citizen and as a human being, have the right to critique the police on whether they are doing their job as well. All right. So before I jump into that, I want to give our guiding questions for today. So we can apply these questions to my story as well before I start. Let me see if I get this right. All right. So you all can purchase any of my books at collinscubicle.com. In terms of guiding questions for today, I want you all to be thinking about what interactions have you had in your lifetime with the police. These can be positive or negative. If a police officer helped you fix a flat tire, that's a positive interaction that you had. And I want you all to promote those positive interactions, but also critique any negative interaction that you've had. And second, as I get into the story of Native Invisibility, do you think the police officers are doing their job? Why or why not? All right. So my personal little vignette with police is kind of in that gray area, right? I don't believe that police were being super aggressive, but I also don't think that they were necessarily doing their job in every point of this story. I went to high school in Chicago. So I went to De La Salle High School. In order to go to De La Salle High School, I had to have a scholarship, and my scholarship was called High Site. So twice a week, I had to go to High Site to study after school, and that was just to make sure that I was on point with my grades. There were about 10 boys. So when I went to De La Salle, it was an all-boys school. There were about 10 boys from De La Salle who were on the same scholarship, and we traveled on the Green Line together. And this was out of safety, right? So we traveled on the Green Line to get to our scholarship that was on Orleans and Division, which is on the north side. We were traveling from the south side. And as boys do, we would play fight, right? So we all went to school together. We would play fight. That day on the way to High Site, myself and another buddy of mine who I will not name, we were play fighting, and I happened to get the best of him on the way to the scholarship. And once we got to the scholarship, we were all talking, jabbing each other, so to speak. At that evening, when we left the scholarship, it was probably around like 9 at night, maybe 9:30, and we had just got through studying, and the buddy who I will not name challenged me. So he wanted to play fight again. So we began play fighting, but this time it got a little carried away, and we wound up in the street as we were tussling. When that occurred, the police pulled a car over. We heard sirens, and they broke us up. They thought we were fighting. If you don't know that area of Chicago is where old Cabrini Green used to be. So New Orleans and Division is where the largest projects in the city used to be. So when the police pulled over, broke us up, it was 2 black police officers. They handcuffed us, put us in the car, and they were interrogating us, so to speak. Were we really fighting? What was our names? What were our social security numbers? How tall were we? Asking us a ton of questions. And up to this point, the police were doing their job. They thought we were fighting. They broke up a fight, and they were dissolving the incident. Now, when we were in the car, and We were frustrated with the incident. We had been play fighting. The officers threatened us by telling us that they were going to take us to the North Pole. And anybody in Chicago who grew up in Chicago in that time knows what the North Pole is. And the North Pole means that they're going to drop us off in the middle of Cabrini Green and that we were going to have to fight our way out. So at that point, in my opinion, and I'll get into this a little bit later on my own platform, but at that point, the police had stopped doing their job and were threatening us with violence and violence from our own people. And so I wanted to bring that story up as one of my personal experiences with the police and a way where I can identify when they're doing their job and when they are not doing their job. All right. So at the point that the police officer was instilling fear in us as young Black men, the police officer was not doing his job. At the point that he was diffusing an altercation, absolutely. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the reading for today. All right. Once again, you can buy any of my books at collinscubicle.com. That's my last name, collinscubicle.com. And our guiding questions for today: what interactions have you had in your lifetime with the police, positive or negative? And as I'm reading, in Native Invisibility, do you think the police officers are doing their job? Why or why not? All right. So feel free to critique these officers. We got to the store without issue. I love shopping with Keith. We split and we all went down different aisles with our own missions. We met back at aisle 7 when it was time to check out. We had almost everything we needed. Oh, snap. We forgot the ground beef. One of y'all go grab some while we wait in line. Who's the fastest? Keith asked, looking at Shannon. It was clear that he thought Shannon was faster. It was our sophomore year of high school. Shannon was a star football prospect while I was a star debate prospect, if there is such a thing. We were different. He was lifting weights, I wasn't. I preferred to argue. I wanted to be a lawyer at the time, still do in a way. There's just no room for law in New Africa, meaning no room for lawyers. No arguments here, zero conflicts, all faith, all God, all love. You already know, Shannon said with a smirk. I let him take that one. I didn't feel like going back through the store to find the ground beef. Keith was a master of reverse psychology. Shannon was happy to run back and grab the ground beef. Shannon shot off toward the frozen foods aisle. He darted, looking like a track star. His back erect, knees coming high. I could dust him, I said to myself as I watched his stride. We have the competitive spirit of brothers. It makes us better. When we got outside, Shannon pushed the cart. The groceries were nearly toppling over. We always got too much for the cart. I think that's why the wheels were in such bad shape. I wasn't going to say anything, but the competitive spirit got to me. I had to make my argument clear. Shannon could not beat me in a fight, a hot dog eating competition, a nose picking contest, or a foot race. He couldn't beat me in the cricket spitting Olympics. I will not lose to Shannon. I saw you running back there. You ain't as fast as you think. You ain't on no Mike Vick shit. Shannon let out a sarcastic laugh. Stick to Madden. That's the only way you can beat me. I definitely mopped him on the game system. I knew I had to dust him in real life. I had to let him know all the practice in the world couldn't make him stronger than me. I will always have the mental victory. What you trying to do? I responded, knowing what he was trying to do. It was a challenge. There could only be one. We would have to run until somebody lost the race, until someone gave in. Even then, we would have to run again to prove the point. I got that Michael Johnson shit, boy. For those of you who don't know, Michael Johnson was at one point the fastest man alive. He could run 24 miles an hour It was crazy speed, right? You mean Magic Johnson? Shannon said quicker than expected. Keith and Shannon both laughed. It was an age joke. Who laughs at age jokes? Next block then. Race to the end of the block, Joe. Keith orchestrated. We were crossing the street. I started to take deep breaths and try to stretch as much as I could, circling my arms like that would help. Shannon did none of this. He continued to push the cart. He got it over the curb with some effort and passed it off to Keith. He was ready. He looked at the end of the block, eyes set, fixated. He knew a lot about sports psychology. Shannon always had a way of turning it on when he needed to. I admired that. It's hard to stay calm when you really want to perform well. Matter of fact, we're going to do this right, Keith stated with authority and a slight laugh. I'm going to the end of the block. Wait for me to tell y'all when to go. He paused, thinking. Matter of fact, wait till my hand drops to go. Keith rushed down the block with the cart. He found our feud funny. He knew Shannon really wanted to impress him. So did I to some extent. The competition brought us all closer, but to Keith, it was hilarious. When he got to the end of the block, he turned to face us. Raising his right hand, he shouted with 3 fingers extended, 3, 2. Then he dropped his hand after signaling 1. Shannon was in a 3-point stance. He took off like a Corvette. I wasn't prepared for the track-like start. My feet were delayed. My legs were heavy. It was though I was running on sand. They couldn't catch up with my eyes. He had a reasonable head start. I saw him looking back at me. That's where you mess up. If you're ever racing somebody, never look back. My eyes were on Keith the entire time, like a hooper looking at the net. I had a goal. Shannon looked back again. Fatal flaw. I was on his tail. My chest was pounding. My breathing was becoming more and more strained. Our strides were very different. My strides were short and choppy, my posture poor. He stood erect like a giraffe, taking giant leaps with each step. His knees were in his chest, arms stiff and tucked tight to his ribs. I moved slightly to the right to pass. He moved to the right to block. He stuck his arm out to hold me back, like race cars hitting a rough turn. I feinted left with a slight jab step, and he fell for it. I moved ahead. We weren't just racing. The competition was deep-seated. My lungs were hurting. A city block is further than you might think. I felt like I hadn't taken a breath the entire race. I was winning, though. I was going to win. I could pass out at the end. It would still be all worth it. Then, whoop, whoop, a police siren went off somewhere near us. I looked to my left, but it was too late. A police car pulled up on the curb in front of me. I was running full speed and didn't have any time to pivot and get out of the way. Boom! I ran right into the hood of the car. The bumper chopped me down at the shins. The collision stung a lot. I braced myself with my forearms. Shannon was able to slow down, but only managed to slow down enough to piss the officers off. Shannon was to my left. He ran into the door as the officer on the passenger side was getting out. His palms hit the window. The momentum forced the car door to shut on the cop's face. Her head was caught between the door and the roof. She wasn't too excited about that, we soon found out. I tried to regain my composure, but I was out of breath, exhausted. My heart was racing, lungs were burning. Hitting the car full speed didn't help. My leg hurt somewhere around my ankle. The cop on the driver's side got out screaming. His hand was on his pistol, and he was pointing at the ground. I couldn't even hear him. He was yelling so loud at such close range. All I heard was body language and bass. I couldn't read his lips. He was pointing at the ground. The sirens were still blaring. It was Mr. Lucas. He didn't recognize me. I didn't care either. So the main character already knew the officer who was pulling up. This job was a much better fit for a racist, I guess. Better than teaching anyway. At least he could only kill my body as a cop. Much better than killing my mind as a teacher, or my spirit, if that was even possible. So there, the question is it possible to kill somebody's spirit? As a foundational Black American, I don't think it's possible to kill our spirit, but we must decide on our own whether that's possible. That's the question that the main character is wrestling with. Get out now, he shouted, still pointing at the ground. How long does it take to become a cop? These are questions that we as citizens must ask, right? How long does it take to become a cop, right? He had put on some muscle and some stomach since he left Kimball Valley Elementary. His partner managed to finally get out of the car. I looked back at her and then at Shannon, who was backstepping away from the police car. She was a short, Latina-looking officer. She was busty. The uniform and vest fit loosely, making her appear just as wide as she was tall. There was a noticeable gash on the bridge of her nose. So the car had broken her nose. She was bleeding from the nose. 2 streams of blood were coming down. It didn't bother her much. She was aggressive. She reached for Shannon's hand. He snatched back instinctively. I turned back to Mr. Lucas. I heard a scuffle now. Behind me. I was focused on Mr. Lucas. I didn't want to do what he said, so I refused. I stood there. I didn't get down. I was running and wasn't doing anything wrong, but his hand was on his gun, and I was a little nervous. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't. He would have to shoot me. That's when she broke free. New Africa. That's when I knew the vision. So, not to get too elaborate, but the main character is sort of having an existential moment, and existential really just means that he's getting in tune with his personal feelings about the power structure and the power dynamic between himself and Officer Lucas, who he knew already. And whenever we have those interactions with police officers, understanding that police officers are a military extension of the United States, right? So there is a power dynamic at play. And you see this in our country as we bulk against police, they release the National Guard, right? So like they're slowly getting more aggressive and more intense. But it is our job as humans to analyze those power structures. And the main character is analyzing that power structure and asking, is this officer doing his job? I was just running, so I'm not going to follow him. But we know in our lives and in this country, that is a fatal flaw for a lot of Black men and women. And I want us to shine the light on the incidents with Black women as well, because those get often overlooked. So remember those guiding questions. Remember where you can purchase any of my books, whether that's Native Invisibility or my children's book series, Zola's Daddy-Daughter Dates, which I will be reading tomorrow in collaboration with Burst Into Books. And as I said, you can shop at collinscubicle.com. And also make sure that you are sharing those interactions that you have with police, whether those be positive or negative, and analyze your relationship with that power structure. I look forward to seeing many of you all tomorrow for my next reading. Thank you guys very much, and be safe out there.